Sold by her abusive father to the ruthless Keanu, she believes her life is over. Just another deal sealed with her blood and tears. But instead of breaking her, he turns against the monster who sold her, rewriting her fate with bullets, vengeance, and an unexpected kind of mercy. By the time Lara turned 18, she could tell what kind of night it would be just from the way her father closed the front door. A gentle click meant he'd lost a little money. A slam that rattled the frame meant she should already be in her room, lights off, pretending to sleep and praying the floorboards wouldn't betray her. That night the whole house shook. Bottles clinked in the plastic bag he dropped on the table. There was laughter from the men with him, rough and familiar, the kind that never reached their eyes. Lara stood in the narrow kitchen, fingers still wet from washing dishes, her heartbeat thudding in the silence between footsteps. "Lara," her father barked, voice already slurring. "Get out here, we got guests." She wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped into the living room. The air was thick with cigarette smoke and cheap cologne, the curtains drawn even though it was barely evening. 3 men sat on the sagging couch. 2 of them she knew by sight, local gamblers with loud shirts and louder mouths. The 3rd man stood near the window, silent, hands in the pockets of his black coat. Everyone in their neighborhood knew him by a nickname, Keanu. Not because he was the actor, of course, but because he looked a little like him, tired eyes, long dark hair, black suits that never had a wrinkle. Kids whispered stories about him the way people used to whisper about monsters. Some swore he'd taken down a whole gang by himself. Others said he could make debts and debtors disappear overnight. What no one knew for sure was whose side he was really on. Lara's father waved his hand at her like she was a piece of furniture he wanted moved. "See, I told you, beautiful girl, hard worker, obedient mostly." The way he said it made something cold run through her. Keanu's gaze shifted to her, slow and measured. Up close, he didn't look like a monster. He looked tired, older than the lines on his face. He studied the bruise half hidden by her hair, the thin scar on her wrist she still couldn't explain away as kitchen clumsiness, the small way she tried to make herself invisible near the door. "Come back to the table," one of the gamblers said, slapping her father's shoulder. "We're not here for a family reunion." Her father laughed too quickly. "Business first, right?" he mumbled. Lara's stomach knotted. "Business." She knew her father owed money. The late-night phone calls, the whispered threats through the receiver, the sudden silences when she walked into a room. None of it was subtle. But she had always thought the worst that could happen was that they'd lose the house, maybe the old car she had just learned to drive. She never once imagined they'd try to take her. Her father sat, shoving aside empty bottles to clear a space on the coffee table. "Look," he said, leaning forward toward Keanu, "we both know I'm good for it, I just need time." "You said that last month," the man on the couch muttered. "I had a run of bad luck," her father shot back, the defensiveness in his voice edged with panic. "You know how it is, one card, one spin, and—" "We're done listening to stories about your luck," the other gambler said. Keanu didn't sit, he just watched, the room bent around his silence. Lara stayed by the doorway, hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles ached. She remembered when her father had been different, before the gambling, before the bottles, before grief turned him into something sharp and unpredictable. When her mother died, he'd promised to take care of her. Some days he still tried. Most days, the grief and the addiction did the talking for him. Tonight, those voices were winning. "You owe a lot of money," Keanu finally said, his voice low and even. "You've had chances, you used them." Her father's face flushed. "I just need—" "You need a miracle," one of the gamblers cut in. "Or you need to pay." Silence settled like dust. Lara's father swallowed hard. His gaze flicked to her, then away, then back again. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw the man he used to be, scared, cornered, ashamed. And then he did the thing that would split her life into before and after. "I have something worth more than cash," he said, his voice dropping. "A way to guarantee you get what you're owed." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "You're out of things to pawn." "Not things," her father said. His hand trembled slightly as he gestured toward her. "Someone." The word slammed into her like a fist. The room blurred at the edges. The humming fridge, the flickering TV in the background, the ticking clock she'd grown up with, all of it faded behind a roaring in her ears. The gambler with the gold watch chuckled. "You serious, old man?" "She's strong," her father pressed on as if he were reading off a sales pitch. "She cleans, she cooks, she works like a mule, never complains. You keep her and I pay down the rest. She can work off what I owe. 2 years, 3, however long you want." "Dad," Lara whispered, but it came out too small, too soft. He didn't look at her. One of the gamblers whistled under his breath. "You're actually offering your own daughter as collateral. That's a new low, even for you." Humiliation burned in her chest, hot and choking. Part of her wanted to scream, to throw something, to run. Another part was frighteningly, horribly calm. Deep down, buried under years of broken promises and half-hearted apologies, she had always feared this, that if her father was ever truly trapped, he would choose himself. He just had. Keanu turned fully toward her now, really seeing her. Their eyes met, and for 1 second she thought, hoped, he would shut this down, tell her father he was insane, walk away. Instead, he asked, "How old are you?" 18, she said, the word sticking in her throat. He studied her face, then the rope burns on her father's knuckles, the half-healed bruise fading on her cheek. "And you agree to this?" he asked. The room went quiet again, a heavy, expectant silence. The gamblers leaned in. Her father finally met her eyes, and in his gaze she saw not love or regret, but a desperate plea. "Say yes. Save me. Fix what I broke." She felt something inside her crack. Did she agree? Of course not. Every cell in her body screamed no. But she also knew what happened when her father disappointed men like this. She'd heard stories. She'd seen people vanish from the neighborhood, their apartments suddenly empty, their names never spoken aloud again. If they hurt him, she would still be the one left to pick up the pieces. It had always been that way. Her voice came out steady, surprising even herself. "What happens if I say no?" One of the gamblers snorted. "No isn't really on the menu, sweetheart." Keanu's jaw tightened. For a moment, something dark flickered across his face, like a storm rolling in behind his eyes. "You work for me," he said slowly, choosing each word with care. "You follow my rules, you don't run, you don't lie. In return, your father keeps breathing long enough to settle what he can." "And if she runs?" the man with the gold watch asked, almost eager. "Then the debt comes due another way," Keanu answered, his gaze still locked on Lara's. A chill ran through her. She had the sudden, dizzy feeling that she was standing on the edge of a cliff, and whichever way she stepped, there was no way back up. Her father started nodding too fast. "See, it's fair, it's—" "It's not fair," Lara cut in, the words bursting out before she could stop them. "You're selling me." He flinched like she'd slapped him, then scowled, anger swallowing the brief flash of shame. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he snapped. "You think I want this? You think I have a choice?" "You always had a choice," she said quietly. "You just never chose me." The truth of it hung in the air between them. Keanu's expression shifted almost imperceptibly at that. The gamblers exchanged looks, clearly impatient. "So," the one with the watch said, "we doing this or not?" Lara looked at her father, at the sweat on his forehead, the desperation in his eyes, the tremor in his hands. Once, when she was 10, he had carried her home for 3 blocks after she scraped her knees on the sidewalk, whispering, "I got you, baby girl, I got you," over and over. Tonight, he was handing her over to strangers, so he wouldn't have to face what he'd done. Something inside her finally went still. She straightened her shoulders and met Keanu's gaze head-on. "If I go with you," she said, "you don't hurt him, not because he deserves it, because I don't want his blood on my conscience too." He studied her for a long moment. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, like he was measuring something invisible. How much of her was fear, how much was strength? "Deal," he said. Her father let out a shaky breath that sounded almost like relief. He stood quickly, grabbing a crumpled contract from the table, hands fumbling for a pen. "You won't regret this," he babbled. She's tough. She'll do whatever you want. Right, Lara?" She said nothing. Keanu crossed the space between them with controlled, unhurried steps. Up close, she could see the faint scar along his jaw, the hint of stubble, the tired shadows under his eyes. His presence filled the small room, not loud, not showy, just there. He reached into his coat, and for a second everyone tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a thin coil of rope. Her chest tightened. "Is that necessary?" she asked, keeping her voice as flat as she could. "For now," he said, "until we understand each other." He motioned for her to turn. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to stand still as the rope brushed against her wrists. The contact was impersonal, almost gentle, but the symbolism was brutal. She was no longer just her father's daughter. She was collateral. As he tied the knot, he leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You're not property," he murmured. The words hit her harder than any insult her father had ever thrown. She almost laughed, bitter, disbelieving. "Could have fooled me," she whispered back. He paused for the briefest moment, fingers tightening on the rope. When he spoke again, his tone was different, still soft, but edged with something iron. "Remember this later," he said. "You agreed to save him, that was your choice. What happens next, that's yours too, whether you see it yet or not." She didn't understand what he meant, and she didn't have time to ask. He stepped back, the mask of cold distance sliding back over his features as the gamblers watched. Her father thrust out his hand, and Keanu took it. Their handshake was firm, deliberate, sealing more than a deal. Lara felt their eyes on her like weight. "Take care of her," her father said, trying to sound casual and failing. "She's all I've got." For a moment, Keanu simply stared at him. Then his voice dropped, quiet but cutting. "If she were all you had," he said, "we wouldn't be standing here." He turned toward the door, giving Lara a small nod to follow. The rope tugged against her wrists as she moved, every step away from the life she knew feeling like a step into a tunnel with no light at the end. At the threshold, she couldn't help herself. She turned back. Her father stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by smoke and empty bottles, his shoulders sagging under a weight he had mostly put there himself. Their eyes met one last time. She waited for him to say, "I'm sorry," or "I'll fix this," or anything that didn't sound like an excuse. He said nothing. There was a finality in his silence that hurt more than any bruise. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Outside, the night air was cool and smelled faintly of rain and gasoline. A black car waited at the curb, sleek and silent. One of the gamblers opened the back door, but Keanu shook his head. "She rides up front," he said. Lara slid into the passenger seat, awkward with her bound wrists. Keanu took the driver's side, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb without another glance at the house shrinking in the rearview mirror. For a while, neither of them spoke. Streetlights slid across her face like bars of pale gold. She tried to memorize every corner shop and cracked sidewalk they passed, just in case she ever had a chance to come back. "You hate him," Keanu said quietly, eyes on the road. She swallowed. "He's my father." "That's not what I asked." She stared out the window, watching the neighborhood give way to the wider roads that led toward the city. The answer sat heavy in her chest. "I don't know what I feel anymore," she admitted. "I just know it hurts." He nodded once, like that made sense to him. They drove past the sign that marked the edge of her neighborhood, the line she'd barely ever crossed alone. The world beyond it felt huge and dangerous and full of unknowable possibilities. "Where are you taking me?" she asked finally. There was a long pause. When he replied, his voice was calm, but there was a strange current beneath it, something she couldn't read. "Somewhere your father can't hurt you again," he said. "And somewhere you're going to learn who you really are when you're not busy saving the man who sold you." Her breath caught in her throat. Before she could respond, he flicked on the turn signal and steered the car not toward the industrial district, where the rumors said bad deals were finished, but in the opposite direction, toward the bright lights of the city center. And as the car merged onto the main road, heading straight for a place she had never been and a future she could not imagine, Lara wondered if the unthinkable thing tonight wasn't that her father had sold her. but that the dangerous man she'd been traded to might be the first person in her life who didn't see her as something to own. The thought scared her more than anything, and for the first time that night, a tiny, stubborn spark of something else flickered under the fear, something she barely dared to name. The city rose around them like a forest of glass and steel, every window catching a piece of the night. Lara watched it all through the windshield, wrists still bound, heart pounding in a rhythm that didn't match the slow, controlled way Keanu drove. She had imagined the place a man like him would take her to. Some hidden basement with metal doors and no windows, a warehouse by the docks, a room that smelled like fear. Instead, the car slid into the underground parking of a luxury high-rise, the kind she'd only ever seen from a bus window and never imagined stepping inside. "Out," he said quietly when the engine cut off. The elevator ride was smooth and almost silent. Soft music played, oddly cheerful against the tightness in her chest. Keanu stood beside her, hands loose at his sides, as if he were taking a friend home instead of a girl he'd just claimed as collateral. Her bound hands felt louder than the music. At the top floor, the elevator doors opened to a small private lobby with a single door. Keanu pressed his palm to a black panel. It scanned his hand with a soft beep, then unlocked with a quiet click. Lara braced herself. The apartment was beautiful. Warm light spilled across polished wood floors, tall windows framed the city like a painting, and shelves lined the walls, filled with books instead of weapons. A soft gray couch sat opposite a low table scattered with open files and a half-empty cup of coffee. It felt lived in, not staged. Human. "Welcome to the least exciting part of my life," Keanu said, closing the door behind them. "Stay there a moment." He moved behind her. She stiffened instantly, muscles knotting, every bad story she'd ever heard firing at once in her brain. For a second, she thought he was going to tighten the rope. Instead, she heard the soft snick of a knife being opened. "Easy," he murmured. The blade slid under the rope at her wrists. One clean motion, and it fell away, dropping to the floor like a shed skin. Circulation rushed back into her hands in a wave of pins and needles. She flexed her fingers, staring at the rope on the ground as if it might crawl back up by itself. "You run and I let the debt fall back on your father," he said calmly, slipping the knife back into his pocket. "You stay and you work, but you stay as a person, not a prisoner, understand?" She rubbed her wrists, trying to read his face. "Why would you trust me not to run?" "I don't," he said. "I trust that you care more about what happens to him than he ever cared about what happened to you, at least for now." The words stung because they were true. A door opened down the hallway. A woman stepped out, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was small and wiry, with a messy bun and sharp, curious eyes half hidden behind glasses. "You're late," she called out. "I was about to." She stopped when she saw Lara. Her gaze flicked from the rope on the floor to the bruise on Lara's cheek, then to Keanu. "This is her." "Lara," he said. "This is May. She keeps this place from falling apart and me from forgetting to eat." May stepped closer and her expression softened. "You look like you've been through a blender," she said gently. "Bathrooms down the hall, second door on the left. There are clean towels and some clothes. Go shower, take your time." Lara hesitated. Receiving kindness in this moment felt almost painful. "I didn't agree to." "You agreed to work," Keanu cut in. "Not to stay dirty and terrified in my living room. Clean up. We talk after." There was no threat in his voice, just a firm finality. She nodded slowly and followed May's pointing hand down the hall. The bathroom was larger than her entire bedroom back home. White tiles, glass shower, a mirror that showed her more clearly than she wanted. She met her own reflection and almost didn't recognize the girl staring back. Hair tangled, cheeks hollow, eyes red-rimmed and too old. She stepped under the hot water and let it pound against her skin until the ache behind her eyes finally broke. The tears came soundless and unstoppable, mixing with the steam, sliding down her face in rivers she'd held back for years. You couldn't cry loudly in her father's house. Tears were accusations he didn't want to hear. Here the water swallowed every sound. She cried for her mother, for the soft songs that used to float around the small kitchen. She cried for the girl who had believed her father when he said, "I'll do better, I swear." She cried for the part of her that had still hoped, even tonight, that he would choose her. By the time she turned off the water, the storm inside her was quieter. Not gone, but quieter. A stack of folded clothes waited on the counter. Loose black sweats, a faded t-shirt, socks that were way too big. She put them on and found that everything smelled faintly of detergent and something clean and sharp, maybe his cologne. When she stepped back into the living room, May sat on the couch with a laptop, typing quickly. Keanu stood near the window, looking out at the city. He turned when he heard her. "Sit," he said, motioning to the chair opposite him. She sank into it, feeling strangely exposed in clothes that weren't hers, in a home that definitely wasn't hers. "Here's how this works," he said. "You'll help with the office side of my work, calls, translations when needed, basic research. You can cook if you want, but no one's expecting you to play housemaid. You don't leave this apartment alone for now, not until I'm sure the men I deal with don't see you as a loose end." "So I am a prisoner," she said, the bitterness slipping out. "You're under protection," he corrected. "Protection has rules." "What exactly is your work?" she asked. "Everyone in my neighborhood thinks you're some kind of devil with a nice car." May snorted softly from the couch. "That's almost flattering." Keanu leaned back, considering her. "I collect debts. I broker deals between people who don't like each other. Sometimes I make problems go away before they explode. Sometimes I let them explode in the right direction." "That sounds like a very poetic way to say crime," Lara said. "Sometimes crime is just a mirror," he replied. "It shows what people really value." "And what do you value?" she asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. His gaze didn't waver. "Balance," he said. "Keeping bad people from getting too powerful and stupid people from getting themselves killed, and giving people who have been hurt at least one person who won't lie to them." The last part landed somewhere deep inside her, where the rawness still lived. Before she could answer, the elevator dinged faintly from the private lobby. May's head snapped up. Her fingers flew over the laptop. A second later, the security screen on the wall lit up, showing a man in his 30s standing alone in the lobby, shifting from foot to foot. Lara recognized him with a jolt. Alex, one of the neighborhood guys who played cards with her father sometimes, always smiling, always a little too friendly when she brought out beer. "What is he doing here?" she blurted. Keanu was already moving toward the door. "Stay," he said over his shoulder. "Don't say a word." He opened the door just enough to stand in the frame. "You're early," Keanu said. Alex tried for a grin, but it didn't stick. His eyes darted around, nervous. "Heard you made a new investment tonight," he said. "Thought maybe you'd want to renegotiate. Her old man owes a lot of people, not just you." Lara's stomach dropped. "She's not available," Keanu said mildly. "Come on, man," Alex insisted, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "You know she's worth more than whatever number you wrote on that paper. There are buyers who—" The slap of sudden silence inside her head was louder than his words. She understood him before he finished the sentence, and it made her feel cold all over. Keanu's face didn't change, but the air around him did. "Say that again," he said softly. Alex hesitated, then he shrugged, misreading the calm for interest. "I'm saying we can move her, quick, clean. We both get paid, the old man's slate gets wiped, everybody's happy. There's this guy across the border who—" He didn't finish. Keanu's hand moved so fast Lara almost didn't see it. 1 second Alex was talking, the next he was pressed against the hallway wall, Keanu's forearm pinning him by the throat. The friendly, controlled man Lara had ridden with was gone. In his place was something hard and precise. "You came to my door," Keanu said, voice low as a distant storm, "and suggested I sell a girl I just pulled out of a bad situation like she's a car part." Alex clawed weakly at his arm. "It's just business." "No," Keanu said. "This is the part where business ends." May stepped into the hallway, eyes wide but unsurprised. Lara hovered near the edge of the living room, torn between fear and something like fierce relief at seeing Alex finally helpless. Keanu loosened his grip just enough for Alex to breathe. "You tell your boss," Keanu said, "that any hand reaching for her now is reaching for me, and I take hands." Alex coughed hard, nodding jerkily. "Why, yeah, okay, man, we're good. Keanu let him go with a shove that sent him stumbling back into the lobby. "If you come here again without an invitation," he added, "you won't leave standing, I promise you that." The door closed with a firm click. For a moment, the only sound was Alex stumbling away down the hall outside, his curses faint and panicked. Keanu turned back to Lara. Some of the storm had already faded from his face, but not all. "People will test boundaries," he said simply. "That was one, there will be others." She swallowed. "He was going to sell me again." "Yes. And you didn't even think about agreeing." "No," he said, "I'm not in that business." "Then what business are you really in?" she demanded, frustration and confusion tangling in her voice. "Because none of this makes sense. You scare everyone, you threaten people, but then you bring me to this and you stop a guy like him at your door. Why?" May closed her laptop with a soft click. "Because he's stubborn," she said, "and because he has lines he won't cross even when it would be easier. You'll figure the rest out." Lara looked from May to Keanu, feeling like she'd walked into the second half of a movie and missed all the events that made these people who they were. Her life had been split in two in a single night, and now she was standing in a place that was neither past nor future, trying to see the shape of either. "Get some sleep," Keanu said finally. "May will show you your room. Tomorrow we start." "Start what?" she asked. He held her gaze for a beat, and there was a hint of something almost like a challenge there. "Teaching you how not to break," he said, "even when the people who were supposed to protect you already did." The words landed in her chest and stayed there, heavy and complicated. May touched Lara's elbow gently. "Come on," she said, "it's been a long day." Lara followed, but before she turned down the hallway, she glanced back at Keanu one last time. He had gone back to the window, looking out over the city, shoulders set, a lone figure in a room that suddenly felt much bigger. For the first time since her father sold her, she realized something she hadn't let herself consider. Whatever this man's ghosts were, he carried them alone. In her small new room, with clean sheets and a door that locked from the inside, Lara lay awake long after the city lights blurred into one soft glow. Sleep hovered close but wouldn't land. Her mind replayed Alex's offer, Keanu's quick violence, the way he'd said "you're not property" like it was an oath. Somewhere below, traffic hummed. Somewhere across town, her father was probably celebrating the fact that he was still alive, maybe already back at a card table. She clenched her hands in the blanket. Tomorrow, she would start this strange work for a dangerous man who had drawn a line at selling her like merchandise, but who still held her future in his hands. And as the first gray light of dawn crept around the edges of the curtains, she couldn't shake the feeling that the most dangerous thing in this apartment might not be his gun or his temper, but the possibility that he might actually mean it when he said he wouldn't lie to her. Morning found her in the kitchen, barefoot, drawn by the smell of coffee and something warm. May moved around the stove with the ease of someone who knew where everything lived. A pan sizzled, plates were already set out. "Sit," May said without turning. "If you try to help, I'll just have to redo it." Lara managed a small, reluctant smile. "You sound like my mom used to." May paused, then glanced back, eyes softening. She must have been smart. Keanu appeared a minute later, dressed in another black suit, hair still damp from a shower. He nodded at Lara but didn't offer a good morning. Somehow she appreciated that. Forced cheer would have felt like another lie. Over scrambled eggs and toast, he laid out her new orbit. "There are rules," he said. "You don't answer calls you don't recognize. You don't open the door without checking the cameras. If anyone mentions your father's name, you tell me before you answer. Clear." "Crystal," she said, trying to keep the sarcasm from her tone and only half succeeding. May slid a thick tablet across the table. "This is yours now. Work phone, secure apps, access to our files, don't lose it. It costs more than my first car. What will I be doing exactly? Lara asked, picking it up carefully. The black screen reflected a girl who looked more rested but still wary. Today, Keanu said, listening. That's how she found herself on the couch a little later, tablet balanced on her knees, her name written in neat letters on a file. Lara. Inside were basic instructions, access codes, even an emergency list that included hospitals and safe houses scattered across the city. This looks more like a social worker's folder than a gangster's, she muttered. Gangsters don't do paperwork, May said from her desk. We do. Calls came in throughout the morning, people owing money, angry voices, scared ones. Lara listened with her headphones, taking notes, watching how Keanu handled each conversation. He never raised his voice. He didn't threaten randomly. When he did push, it was targeted, specific, like he knew exactly where people's fears lived. But in between the harsh calls, there were others that didn't fit the picture. A woman asking if it was safe to go back to her apartment. A boy no older than 16 reporting that his brother hadn't come home from a job with the wrong guys. An older man thanking Keanu for sorting out those idiots who'd cornered his shop. Who are you? She asked quietly after one of those calls. Someone who used to break things for bad people, he said. Now I break bad people so they stop breaking others, on my better days anyway. And my father, she pressed, what category is he in? He met her eyes, depends what he does next. The answer sat between them like a stone. Around midday, Diego arrived, a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and a constant half-smile. He brought sandwiches and a burst of noisy energy that made the apartment feel less like a vault. So this is the famous Lara, he said, dropping onto the opposite armchair and unwrapping his food. The girl who made the great Keanu break his no hostages rule. I'm not a hostage, she said automatically. Exactly, Diego replied, as if he'd been waiting for that answer. You want anything from the outside world? Real coffee, junk food, a plant. Don't overwhelm her, May warned from her corner. It's day one, not Christmas. Despite herself, Lara felt a small thread of amusement push through the tension. Diego caught it and grinned like he just scored a point. You'll thank me when he starts one of his monologues about balance and justice, Diego said, nodding toward Keanu. Someone has to bring snacks. The lightness lasted until the intercom buzzed. All three of them froze for a heartbeat. Then May's fingers flew to the keyboard, pulling up the camera feed. The screen on the wall flickered to life, showing a delivery guy in a bright jacket holding a small brown package. No logo, May murmured. No order placed. Zoom in, Keanu said. She did. The package was plain, unmarked except for a cheap white label with a single word typed on it. Lara. Her name looked wrong there, like it had been scraped off her and pasted onto cardboard. Did you give anyone this address? Keanu asked quietly. She shook her head, throat tightening. I didn't even know this place existed until last night. He exhaled slowly, thinking, Diego. On it, Diego said, already getting up. He moved to the small room off the hall, returning with a compact device that looked like a cross between a scanner and a toy. I'll check the package in the lobby. If it sings, I'll smash it. Don't be dramatic, May said, but her voice held tension. Keanu looked at Lara. Stay here, don't open the door, don't go near the windows. He and Diego disappeared into the private lobby. On the screen, she watched Diego step out, exchange a few casual words with the delivery man, then take the package. He ran the scanner over it. It flashed green, then yellow. That's not a color I like, May muttered. A second later, the device beeped once and went dark. Signal blocker, Diego's voice crackled over the intercom. Someone tried to tag it, I killed it. Keanu took the box from him carefully, as if it might explode from disappointment. He opened it right there in the lobby, blade flicking neatly through the tape. Inside was a single envelope. He slid the letter out, eyes scanning it quickly. His jaw tightened in a way Lara was starting to recognize, the sign that something had just gone from annoying to serious. He brought the letter inside and placed it on the table in front of her. Read. Her name was typed on the front. Inside, the message was short, letters slightly off-center as if punched out on an old machine. You think he bought you to save you. He bought you to use you. Ask him what